Today we're exploring life on the Isles of Scilly, a stunning cluster of islands off the southwest coast of England, celebrated for their natural beauty, unique wildlife and a close-knit community. From afar they seem idyllic, unspoiled beaches, crystal clear waters and a slower, gentler pace of life. But beneath that postcard image lies a more complex reality, one that reflects many of the broader challenges facing rural and coastal communities across the UK. The Isles of Scilly is steeped in myth and legend, often linked to the lost land of Lyonesse, said to have been home of Sir Tristan, a knight of Sir Arthur's Round Table, however was swallowed up by the sea in a single night, a place of adventure, heroism and loss. Yet in reality rural life is not so serene. The island today faces interlinked pressures, housing shortages, an ageing population, fragile services, environmental vulnerability, and an economy heavily dependent on tourism. Yet the challenges of the Isles of Scilly go beyond housing. They represent the wider dilemmas of hyper-rurality, where distance, small scale and isolation amplify social and economic pressures. Through a conversation with the CEO of the Isles of Scilly Wildlife Trust, we'll explore what it means to live, work and sustain community in a place that is both paradise and pressure points, and what the future might hold for Britain's most remote coastal communities. Over to Julian.
I'm Chief Executive, and so I've got overall responsibility for everything that the Trust does. And we're unusual as a wildlife trust. We're the smallest wildlife trust in England, but we've got easily the biggest influence within the small area that we operate. Here, we cover, our long-term tenancy covers about half the area of the island. We are important as being the people who keep the paths open, who are maintaining the quality of the environment, the attraction people are enjoying, and we're also the biggest employer in the voluntary sector here in Scilly.
What are the biggest challenges of living and working in such an isolated coastal setting? Haven't you lived on other islands before, like Orkney?
So I had 10 years living in Orkney, so I'm used to island life. What I would say about Scilly is that we've got a particular problem over the cost of the accommodation and the limited availability of accommodation. So we've got a particular housing crisis.
This crisis is shown in the numbers. As of 2021 census, of roughly 1,297 dwellings across the island, only around 942 are permanently occupied. About 355 dwellings have no usual residents, meaning roughly 27% of housing is unavailable to full-time residents. Back to Julian.
Which is much worse than I've encountered elsewhere. So that makes a big difference in terms of being able to recruit, and it means that if someone leaves the organisation, it's very hard to fill their role. With a very small population here of about 2,000 people around the year, we can't guarantee that the skills we need will already be within the community in someone who is looking for a job.
Julian is correct to believe this. In 2024, 76% of employers in the Cornwall and Isles of Scilly region reported recruitment challenges.
So that's the biggest challenge. Obviously, logistics, the transport costs, the delays in getting things to us are difficult, but that's a smaller problem in the scale of things.
How does that isolation shape community resilience? Does it make people more self-reliant or more vulnerable?
I certainly think that the simple answer is that it's complicated. I think that what's obvious is that with people being under pressure here, having insufficient housing, lack of security of tenure in the flat or house they're renting, and high cost of living, then it does mean, and also with such a small scale of the place, and with everyone in this goldfish bowl together, people spend their entire working and non-working lives in the islands. It's not like in West Cornwall where a village of 2,000 people might have 3/4 or 80% of its population commuting to Camborne or Penzance, and so having a whole different experience for different people when they're at work. But here we're all tightly in together. It does lead to people being there's a tendency for people to be quite judgmental. It does help people get to know each other better. And there are benefits from us knowing who's who and being able to more quickly have the right conversation with the right people, right person who might be able to help.
What Julian describes goes beyond everyday pressures like housing or recruitment. It shows how geography and national policy combine to shape life on the Isles of Scilly. Here, everyday challenge is amplified. Building costs are around 50% higher than on the mainland, sometimes even double, because every material and trade person has to be brought over by sea or air. And since the islands are now classed as a national landscape, a new name for areas of outstanding natural beauty, planning permission is now harder to secure. The Levelling Up and Regenerations Act 2023 has made this tighter still. Section 85 now requires authorities not just to have regard to landscape protection, but to seek to further it. It's well-intentioned, yet it often slows or restricts affordable housing, the very thing communities like Scilly most need. The name of the Act can feel ironic here, creating inequality rather than closing the gap. In such a small, interconnected place, it can feel like living in a goldfish bowl, close, intense, sometimes claustrophobic. What some call island fever sits alongside real resilience, connection and confinement, side by side. But if we do loosen the planning restrictions, do we risk losing the identity of the islands? Should we keep the bucolics of the islands and risk the well-being of the residents in the process? Do we face objective reality, or stay subdued in a fictitious one? Tourism is vital here, but can also put pressure on housing, infrastructure and traditional livelihoods like fishing. How do you see tourism shaping community life and the local environment?
It's difficult because in a free market, there are different interests and they compete. On an island like Tresco, where all the property is owned by the company that has the long tenancy for the island, then they can decide how many what they build, who they build it for, what they renovate, and what the right balance is between workers' accommodation and the visitor accommodation. On St Mary's or any of the other islands, in fact, then there isn't a way of balancing those pressures. And so there's some real problems as a result. Most successful tourism businesses actually manage to buy or build enough housing such that they can accommodate at least some of their workforce.
Do you think this issue is receiving enough attention politically or in the media, and if so, to what degree?
In England, there's no political attention on the special challenges around islands, in the cost of transport to islands, the housing pressure on islands, and the challenges that come around remoteness with regards to essential services. And that's a big contrast with Scotland, where the Scottish Government has passed an islands bill where every bit of legislation considers whether there's any special impacts of that legislation on island settings, and where the Scottish Government also invests in organisations like Highlands and Islands Enterprise.
What Julian describes shows how life on the Isles of Scilly is shaped not only by geography but by governance, by what's missing as much as what's present. With no dedicated island policy in England, communities like Scilly must work within national systems that don't always fit with island realities. The contrast with Scotland is striking. There, the Island Scotland Act ensures every piece of legislation review its impacts on island communities. Backed by Highlands and Island Enterprise and the Scottish Land Reform, these give small, remote places real power to plan their own futures. England could learn from that model by introducing a national islands policy and properly funding the Isles of Scilly Unitary Authority. As the council itself puts it, being the smallest local authority with the widest remit, it is still seeking a longer-term funding settlement that properly reflects the extra cost of delivering services in an island community. And in Parliament, it was noted that years of underfunding has forced the Isles of Scilly Unitary Authority to raise council tax simply to balance the books. William Cowper once wrote, "God made the country and man made the town, yet here it's clear that neither nature nor humanity alone can shape the future. It takes policy, planning and shared will to comfort both." The Isles of Scilly may seem idyllic from the outside, but beneath the beauty lies a story of fragility, perseverance and belonging, a reminder that even paradise needs protection.